Hello. Happy Father's Day. Thank you for making the choice to join us here at the Greenbrier Church Online. I was thinking that back in August of 2000, Trista told me that I was going to be a dad. And in my mind, it was just another part of this huge transition that we were making. We just moved to a new town. I had started a new career. And now it seems that our family of 2 and a dog was going to transition to a family of 3 and a dog. Yet I didn't really feel like a dad. She wasn't showing. There were no kicks or hiccups to feel. The whole thing was kind of theoretical and abstract. Even on the cold February morning at 5 a.m. when we went to the hospital, I didn't feel like a dad yet. Trista went into labor, and she was in hard labor for 18 hours. The doctor came in and told us that Trafton was in distress, and so they prepped the surgery room for an emergency C-section. And those next 30, 45 minutes were a blur. But very soon, Trista and Trafton and I were back in her room with our family. Trista was wore out. Our parents were trying to be nice to each other by passing Trafton around the room to let everybody have equal time, and it still hadn't registered what was going on. I would love to be able to tell you that that was one of the best nights of my entire life, but truthfully, it wasn't. You see, I hadn't slept in 2 days. I was hungry, I was grouchy, and I was scared to death. After our parents made their way back to the house, Trista was asleep, and I sat on the couch and held my baby boy for the very first time. I think that was the first time that it hit me that I was a dad, and I was scared to death. All I could do was pray that God wouldn't allow me to mess this child up. I believe it was Kent Newborn who wrote, "It's much easier to become a father than it is to actually be one." And over the last 23 years, I've realized how true that statement is. Even for guys like me that really, really want the job, it's intimidating. We can master a sport, we can master our career, but it's so much harder to control anything in fatherhood. When the baby starts crying, you can't make it stop. When your daughter starts to walk, you can't keep her from falling and bumping her head. When our son starts failing algebra, you can't make him pass. Today's Father's Day. It's the day that we celebrate the men who've taken on a mentoring role in our lives. And just like that day 23 years ago, once again, it seems that being a father is a bit theoretical and abstract. Gone are the days of Leave It to Beaver where the dad goes to work and plays golf and cuts the grass. Now dads, thankfully, are expected to change diapers and help around the house and take a much more hands-on approach to their family. But even more than that, I think now more than ever, dads have the wonderful opportunity to model what a man looks like, a real man that loves his family, his wife, and God. In our study in the book of Philippians, we come to the end of chapter 2, and Paul gives us the example of 2 Christian men, what all Christian men should strive to be. Paul understands that a man's greatness is not determined by the power that they wield or their position or even their bank account. A godly man is someone who knows God and values the opportunity to be more like Him. As we make our way through the end of Philippians 2, we're going to discover a few values that our men need to develop if we're going to have families, a church, and a community that truly learns to love and to value God. And the first thing that we learn is that real men are men of compassion. Look with me in verse 20 where Paul says, "I have no one else like Timothy who genuinely cares about your welfare. All the others care only for themselves and not for what matters to Jesus Christ." Too often we live our lives in a fog. We don't really pay attention to what's happening in the lives of the people around us. We know people are struggling or drowning. We just kind of walk by on the shore and we can't hear their cries for help. I think it's possible to get so wrapped up and committed to your business that you forget about your family. Anybody who's wrapped up in themselves is nothing more than a mummy. They're not a man. Paul says Timothy's the only one that he knows who genuinely cares about other people. He's compassionate. Our ability to be compassionate literally means that we have the ability to suffer and to struggle with someone else. I read that in the Greek, what Paul actually said about Timothy was that he was able to offer painful sympathy. I like that idea. It encompasses so much more than merely being sorry or feeling sorry for somebody. It carries this weight of getting down where they are in the midst of their need and suffering with them in the midst of their pain. It's something that if you read through the Gospels, you notice that the writers say about Jesus an awful lot. In Matthew 14, we learn that Jesus had compassion on the people, so he healed the sick and fed 5,000. In Matthew 15, we see that Jesus felt compassion on a different crowd. That's when he fed the 4,000. Jesus saw 2 blind men from Jericho in Matthew 20. He was filled with compassion and he healed them. In Mark 1, Jesus feels compassion on a leper. He reaches out and touches him before he heals him. That was an act of compassion. You see, the leper was created in the image of God, not just some casualty of the customs and rules of the day, so Jesus showed him compassion by touching him. One of the most famous parables Jesus ever told has to do with being men and women of compassion. In Luke chapter 10, we read about a Samaritan man who's on a trip from Jerusalem to Jericho, and along the road he finds somebody who'd been beaten, mugged, and is a victim. The Samaritan stops and administers first aid. He takes the man down to the local hotel. He pays the bill up front and says, if there's anything else you need, just charge it to my account. The Samaritan acted out of his compassion. And many of the original listeners and the modern listeners understand that his actions are above and beyond our normal human obligation. I mean, if you're driving down the road from Atlanta and you see somebody beaten, or more than likely you see somebody whose car has run off the road, we would probably call 911. If we had the time, we might actually pull off the side of the road and wait for the professionals to arrive. We might even walk down to the car. But when Jesus is telling the story, there is no 911. There are no EMTs that are able to come and help. If this man is going to survive, the Samaritan has to take the whole burden on himself. Add to that, there's no way that the Samaritan could have known what he was getting himself into. Yet, he was compassionate. He saw the need. He didn't sit back and calculate the cost or get out a piece of paper and try to write down a ledger of how much time and effort and money it was going to cost him. He saw a need. He moved into action. He felt sympathy that was painful. We've tried to model that for our boys. We want them to be people of compassion. Men who just see a need and step into the situation. Sometimes that means pulling off the side of the road to help a stranded driver push their car out of the road. Sometimes it just means buying a cup of coffee and listening while somebody tells you their story. And sometimes it means that you're willing to walk into dark places so that my boys can shine like a bright light in a world full of crooked and perverse people. Compassion is not something you talk about. Compassion is sympathetic feeling and pain. It's something you do. It's time consuming, and it requires your treasure and your time and your talent. But if we're going to have any hope in this world, it will be seen in the compassion of our fathers and our men. Next, Paul says real men have integrity, and the world needs men who are not afraid to be different from the culture and to stand alone in the gap if they have to. In verse 22, Paul writes, Timothy has proved himself. He has served with me in the work of the gospel. Timothy is a man of high moral character, but he's more than that. He's a man of integrity. Character is when you do the right thing over and over until it becomes a part of your life. Character is how you act when somebody is watching you or when somebody's not watching you. But it's just what you do. Let me see if I can explain it this way. When our boys were living at home, we told them they need to pick up their clothes off the floor, they need to put their dishes in the dishwasher, they need to brush their teeth, they need to take care of their stuff. We told them that every day. And now that they're living on their own, when Trista and I go visit them, we notice that they keep their homes relatively clean. They take care of their cars and their electronics and other items. Their dishes are in the dishwasher. Rylan told me that one of his roommates asked him why he was such a clean freak, and he said, "Dad, I just responded, that's what you do." You see, character is doing the right thing because it's your habit. You can train character into a child, but that's just on the surface. Integrity is what's under. Integrity is character that is formed in the heart. Integrity is found in the purity of your mind and your heart that refuses to participate in deception. It's the ability to be absolutely honest with yourself about yourself. While integrity has the ability to produce character, character alone will never produce integrity. If a man has integrity and he sees a character flaw, he sets out to fix that flaw. Integrity is vital because it's the bedrock of every other Christian virtue. I mean, if you have a crack in your virtue, then your life will never be able to hold up to the weight of walking in the manner that Jesus walked. I mean, how in the world can you be humble if you lack the integrity to acknowledge your own weaknesses? How can you love other people if you're not totally honest in the way that you deal with them? How can you truly repent if you refuse to acknowledge and to confess your sins to God? So one of the 8 wonders of the world is the Great Wall of China. The Chinese government and people spend an immense amount of money and labor to construct this border wall to keep the invaders from coming into their country. And while at first it appeared invulnerable, the truth is that marauders like Genghis Khan were able to get through that wall over and over again. Not because they broke the wall down, not because they went around the wall. All they had to do was bribe the gatekeepers. The question that each of us are forced to answer is what is the cost of our integrity? Will you sell your integrity for $1, $100, $1,000? What about a promotion? What about the approval of your peers? Or what about some physical pleasure or temporary recognition? You see, if there's a price at which you're willing to sell your integrity, you might be a person of high moral character, but you're not a person of integrity. Our world, our community, and our church need men of conviction who cannot be bought at any price. They're committed to their values, consistent in their beliefs and convictions. Solomon says in Proverbs 10, verse 9, "The man of integrity walks securely, but he who takes crooked paths will be found out." The bottom line for manhood is integrity. A nice personality will make a good first impression, but the man of integrity does not live in fear that somebody's going to find out the truth about them. Dishonest men produce insecure children and unstable marriages. When we lack integrity, the people that we love the most have no idea where we're coming from or where we're going. We live in a culture that's in desperate need of men who will teach our children not only to develop high character, but a deep integrity. That way we can rest in the thought that they will stand steadfast no matter what comes their way. The third trait that Paul says that happens in real men is real men are committed. Going down a little bit, we see that Paul says that Epaphroditus was your messenger to help me in my need. I'm sending him because he's been longing to see you, and he was very distressed that you heard he was ill. And he was certainly ill. In fact, he almost died. But God had mercy on him. As you read through the letter, you always need to keep in the back of your mind that Paul is under house arrest in Rome. Now, it's true that he wasn't in a prison cell. He was allowed to live in a home, but he had to rent that home. He also had a roommate. a Roman guard who watched him 24 hours a day. And all of his food and all of his necessities had to be provided by friends, Christian friends. That's why he tells the people in Philippi, thank you for taking up an offering. The problem is they were 800 miles away and at least a 6-week trip over rough terrain. And so one of their members, Epaphroditus, volunteered to take the journey. And apparently it wasn't an easy trip because on the way to Rome, he got sick to the point that he nearly died. He got to the point when most of us would have been tempted to just turn around and go home. Yet Epaphroditus was committed to his calling. Even sick, he makes his way to Rome. Even in pain, he finishes his journey. The ability to be committed is a trait that is so desperately needed in our culture. I mean, we have a lot of folks in our world, in our community, that are really, really great starters. They just never finish. They quit their jobs, they quit their relationships, they quit their dreams. They even quit God because it becomes inconvenient or expensive or uncomfortable, or it requires effort. Living a life that's worth living always costs you something. And especially in the church, we have to be intentional about raising up men who are willing to pay the price to be like Christ. We're called to be committed to God, and that requires that we love Him with all of our heart, our soul, our mind, and our strength. And to be pretty honest, it's easy to look like we're truly committed to God and His kingdom. I mean, all you got to do is show up, put some money in a collection plate, and keep your name out of any scandals that would show up online or in the paper. If you do that, everybody will assume you're fully committed to God. But real commitment requires that we do more than the bare minimum. On Father's Day, let me remind you that God is looking for people that have enduring compassion, deep integrity, and who are willing to be fully committed to the cause. I find it awfully tragic that Paul says about Timothy in verse 20 that I have nobody else like him. I wonder why that was. I wonder why there weren't more people who were deeply committed to God. And I wonder why there aren't people more deeply committed to God today. You see, one of the greatest challenges you'll ever face in your life is to live for Christ in front of your wife, in front of your family, in front of your friends and your work associates. But that's going to take all of your strength. Timothy and Epaphroditus are just ordinary guys. They're not superstars. Yet here we are on Father's Day, 2,000 years later, talking about them. And we're talking about them because they were men of integrity, compassion, and commitment. It's the exact same thing they first saw in Jesus. We have the chance to gather at the tables today because our Savior was deeply committed to both of us. He showed us what it was like to be a man of compassion as He poured out His mercy and His grace on the cross. So I invite you to join with me today as we go to the tables and we think about what does it mean? What do we have to do to live a life that is committed to Christ in the same way that Christ was committed to us? We take the bread and the cup so that we can remember the commitment that He had, the compassion that He shown, and the integrity that He lived His life with. And it's a call for us to live the exact same way. I hope you have a wonderful Father's Day. I hope you have a great week. And never forget how deeply you're loved. Go in peace. I look forward to seeing you very soon.